Hello everybody, welcome to Little Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel and drop a like on this video. Trying to hit 50k subscribers over here, so that subscription would be much appreciated. So what we already kind of knew was going to happen finally happened, and Christopher Emmanuel Paul has signed with the Los Angeles Clippers to return after, of course, having one of the probably the most important stint of his entire career overall happening there. And there's a couple of different things to get into, what it means for the Clippers, but then I also want to do a little bit of reflection on Chris Paul because he is going into his 21st season. I believe it is only him and Kyle Lowry who have ever played 20 seasons at the point guard position, and that's awesome for one thing. And of course, Chris Paul also has a storied time with the Clippers. The Lob City Clippers are one of my favorite teams of that decade. I think I did a video on this channel pretty early on about how those teams were simultaneously great and super disappointing. And I think a lot of the trouble that ended up happening for those teams gets blamed on Chris Paul rather unfairly. There is, as much as his reputation exists for being a playoff choker for some reason, the guy literally only has one real major blunder, which is, I believe it was 2012 round 2, if I'm not mistaken, against the Oklahoma City Thunder, where he had a crucial turnover and a bad foul on a Russell Westbrook 3, if I'm remembering those events correctly. Forgive me if I am not. But otherwise, if you go and look at the series that they lost, my God, the difference in the quality of the role-playing performances is definitely the swaying factor. The big one being the Rockets series, where they blew the 3-1 lead. They gave away that crazy comeback in Game 6 because of Josh Smith and Corey Brewer, which part of me says you can't even really blame them for that, because how the fuck were you going to predict either of those guys just to have career nights from 3 at the same fucking time in the fourth quarter? Like, I kind of understand how they got blindsided by that one. But when you look at the stats from the role players for the first 4 games in the series versus the last 3, it's night and day. Meanwhile, Chris Paul and Blake Griffin's numbers only got better as the series went along. So I'm doing what I always do with Chris Paul, which is playing defense, because he is an extremely polarizing player. He is definitely got a very large hater base, and I understand why. He definitely has a good amount of dirty plays under his belt. He is definitely a bit of a dickhead. He also has what's the factor I would call it? He has, like, I don't know, it's not teacher's pet, but it's like, why do you know the rule book so well, you fucking narc? Like, that's what it feels like to me with him. But at the end of the day, I think he is one of the greatest players who has ever played this game, and specifically one of the greatest players to ever play the point guard position. I also think that he is the pound for pound GOAT if we're talking about dudes who are 6 feet tall or shorter, and great defensive player for his size. I don't think there's a 6-foot guard throughout history who, for a prolonged peak, was that good defensively. There's probably a few, but the ones who were that good were not Chris Paul on offense, who is a fucking maestro, to the point where, even though he has completely lost any semblance of the speed and athleticism that he had earlier on in his career, he still manages to pretty much always have a positive net impact, because at the end of the day, he's going to give you like 7 assists and 1 turnover in like 25 minutes. Because one thing you really can't lose, you really don't lose passing ability in your career. Now, he's not nearly as effective of a playmaker as he used to be because he is less threatening as a scorer. But nevertheless, he is an exceptional playmaker, and he adds a lot of value to teams beyond just what he's able to do on the court. I was honestly kind of shocked that there was not more of an effort to bring him back to the Spurs or for other teams to sign him, because frankly, yeah, is Chris Paul the best player to fill a minimum contract on? No, not necessarily the best player, but he historically is going to have a positive impact on your franchise. I felt like he had a very positive impact on Wemby in his second year. It was also just the coaching changing their approach to the point guard play in general beyond just adding Chris Paul. But I think Chris showed in that previous year he can still contribute to winning basketball, which brings us to the Clippers today. And I'm going to do a more prolonged Rusty Buckets video about the Clippers because I think they're a very interesting team They are also one of the oldest NBA teams I have ever seen. I can't imagine they are not, if not breaking the record, at least super high up in the rankings for that specific record, because Kawhi is like, actually, I'm just going to pull up the roster right now just so that I don't have to guess vaguely what players' ages are. Okay, here we go. Kawhi, 34. James Harden, 36. Zubac and John Collins are 28, which is some of the younger guys on this team. Derek Jones Jr. also 28. Bogdan Bogdanovic, 33. Brook Lopez, 37. Nicholas Batum, 37. Chris Dunn, 31. Bradley Beal, 32. They are kind of curbing this average with a bunch of players on the end of the bench who are not going to play. Kobe Saunders or Sanders, Trenton Flowers, Patrick Baldwin Jr., Cameron Christie, Kobe Brown. Not even going to try to pronounce that one, but lots of dudes who are younger who are going to skew that. But like in terms of the actual rotation players, there are 3 28-year-olds, and then every single other player is 31 or above, mostly 33 and above, and Chris Paul is 40. This is an old ass NBA team, and that has its drawbacks. Obviously, more likely to deal with injury. You're not going to be the most athletic team in the world, that's for sure. But I do think there is something to be said about like the camaraderie associated with that, and as well as like the motivation that exists behind it. We're talking about Chris Paul and James Harden, who are ringless, and a ring would do a lot for their legacy. Harden more so than Chris Paul at this point, because Chris Paul will absolutely be doing that as a bus rider, but James Harden would be the second best player if a championship were to possibly come of this. And there is probably a substantial amount of motivation. Now, how much can motivation make up for being over the hill? How much can motivation make for a prolonged injury history? We shall see. But at the very least, I think the locker room should be more or less in agreement with each other. The veteran factor, the fact that everyone's in their 30s, like it's going to be a more mature team. I think there's a cool factor to that. Yes, you could absolutely call the Clippers the retirement home Clippers. In fact, even before this team came together, they were like consistently bringing dudes in who were just old as dirt, like Hedo Turkoglu, Paul Pierce. I think, no, who am I trying to think of as well? There's other examples in there. Old ass team, old, but I also think it's cool that some of the best players of all time are on this roster together. Chris Paul, James Harden, and Kawhi Leonard are all in my top 50. I think they should be in everybody's top 50. And yeah, none of them are near their best, but there's novelty there. I still enjoy that, and I will always get that out of the game, where like, yeah, is it when we're talking about X's and O's in basketball and necessarily how good the Clippers are going to be? I don't really have an answer to that for you right now, but the novelty is very clear. I did talk about Bradley Beal doing a lot of backup ball handling and being better at that than Bogdan Bogdanovic. I think someone replied that because it was like a tongue twister, but it doesn't really matter because Chris Paul is going to be the backup point guard on this team. And while he's not going to be the scorer, and especially not the defender that he was, he still hit his threes well enough. His mid-range shot was still real whenever he used it. He definitely doesn't get to the rim at all. Not that he was ever a super frequent driver, but his one season where he just shot horrifically bad from three in Phoenix was an outlier. Ever since then, he's been at about 37%, 37.7% last year. And I'm actually curious what his volume from mid-range ended up being this previous season. And I hate Basketball Reference on my phone because half of the time it decides I'm not allowed to scroll to the side. Shooting. Less than, or just over 2% of Chris Paul's shots come at the rim. 5% from 3 to 10 feet, 20% from 10 to 16, 10% from 16 foot. And yeah, he's still shooting 52 and 3% from those ranges, so still elite when he does it. The mid-range shot's real, the three ball's real, and he's a great playmaker. And you're getting him on a minimum. I think this is good. I think it's cool. A lot of people will clown on it because the Clippers are at a weird place, but they really have no choice but to try and be competitive, and so long as that is the place that they're in, I cannot blame them for doing it. So, like, yeah, in hindsight, the Kawhi situation has basically been a complete fucking disaster, but it's lasted so long that it's not nearly as big of a disaster as it would have been if they ended up blowing up the roster and tanking and then not getting a bunch of their own draft picks, and you end up getting like a Brooklyn Nets, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown type situation working against you. So like, I think the Clippers are doing the best in the present day for the mistakes that they made in the past, and that's all that you can really ask them to do. But yeah, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.